When the king convened the war council, there were two critical matters on the agenda: Kyle and the Xel'Thari. As the council members exchanged curious glances, the king walked slowly to his throne and sat down. The hall was filled with tension. Taking a deep breath, the king began to speak. There are two important reasons we have gathered here today. First, we need to discuss Kyle and his team. They have been operating out of sight for a long time, following their own order. However, recent events have led us to question their intentions and true identity. The council members started murmuring among themselves. The rumor that Kyle and his team had deliberately led Emma and the others into the Xel'Thari trap had already spread. But no one knew what the king thought about it. The king continued, "But there is a greater threat, the Xel'Thari. They are not just warriors of physical strength, but also masters of mental warfare. Emma and her team have faced them directly. According to Kyle, the Xel'Thari have the ability to take control of the minds of those with strong wills. If we underestimate them, we will suffer losses not only on the battlefield, but also within our own ranks." The room fell silent. The Xel'Thari threat was more serious than anyone had imagined. However, one of the council members stepped forward and spoke. "Your Majesty, do you truly believe Kyle helped us, or was he simply executing his own plans? It is clear that they used us as bait. If they had not acted, Emma and her team might now be under the enemy's control. But still, is this how an ally behaves?" The king remained silent for a moment, then looked over all the council members before speaking. Kyle and his team's intentions remain uncertain. However, their victory against the Xel'Thari proves that they could be an invaluable asset to us. For now, instead of seeing them as enemies, we must focus on gathering more information. But at the same time, we must not place our full trust in them. We cannot forget that they act in their own interests. As the council members pondered the king's words, one of them added, "And your agreement with the Xel'Thari? Your Majesty, considering their mental abilities, can they really be trusted?" The atmosphere in the hall grew even heavier. The king narrowed his eyes. Finally, it was time to reveal a secret he could no longer keep hidden. "I made a deal with the Xel'Thari," he said in a calm but deep voice. "It was meant to ensure they would not become our enemies. However, we now understand that their loyalty is determined solely by the balance of power. If we fail to control them, they will eventually take over us as well." At that moment, the tension in the room peaked. The council members were eager to learn the details of this agreement. One of them asked, "What exactly are the terms of this agreement, Your Majesty?" The king lowered his gaze and finally took a deep breath to reveal the whole truth. The king straightened himself in the deep silence of the council. His eyes carried a heavy burden. This secret could no longer be kept. The council needed to know. "The agreement I made with the Xel'Thari was not a simple alliance or trade deal," he said, his voice deep but firm. The council members listened intently as the king continued. "When I realized that we could not fight them in a war, I chose diplomacy. The Xel'Thari do not attack directly. They conquer from within. They take over minds and turn enemies into their own. A Xel'Thari invasion does not begin with an army marching. It begins when our people wake up one morning and are no longer themselves. The already cold atmosphere in the room became even heavier. Some council members' breathing quickened, but the king pressed on. Listen to me. The Xel'Thari want our planet, our people, but destruction is not in their nature. They wish to build an empire. That is why they made me an offer, to establish a balance between us. Lord Rathmore, the oldest council member, leaned forward. Balance? What balance, Your Majesty? Is it even possible to maintain balance with the Xel'Thari? The king locked eyes with him. This was the most critical part. I gave them a group of people. At that moment, the council members recoiled. Some rose from their seats. Shock and outrage were evident on their faces. What did you just say, Your Majesty? The king continued. I had to make a choice. Either we would fight them and lose a significant portion of our people, or we would make a deal with minimal losses. I agreed to give them a certain number of people voluntarily so they could take control of their minds. The Xel'Thari transformed them into their own kind, seizing their consciousness while preserving their bodies. In return, they promised not to fully invade our world. The room erupted into chaos. Several council members stood and shouted, "This is betrayal!" You sacrificed our people. Who were they? How many did you give them, Your Majesty? The king raised his hand, silencing them all. His eyes were sharp and unyielding. They were only prisoners, and those sentenced to death, he said. Criminals, rejected by society. I gave them to the Xel'Thari. In return, the rest of our people remained free. The Xel'Thari accepted this deal because they needed new soldiers. The room fell silent once more. Some saw this decision as horrifying. Others considered it a strategic move. But the greatest fear among them was whether this agreement had truly ended. Lord Rathmore spoke again, his voice trembling. And if the Xel'Thari demand more, what will you do then, Your Majesty? How many more will you give them? The king closed his eyes. That is what I fear, Lord Rathmore, because I know this war is not over. They will want to maintain this agreement, but I have no more people to give. Tense glances were exchanged among the council members. What does that mean? Another asked. The king slowly straightened up and declared what was now inevitable. It means they will eventually make their move to take us completely. That is why I have gathered the War Council, because we must now prepare to resist the Xel'Thari. At that moment, everyone in the room understood the truth. Peace was over, and war with the Xel'Thari was inevitable. The king took a deep breath in the silence of the War Council. They had reached an unavoidable point. War with the Xel'Thari was coming. But to win this war, knowledge and experience were crucial, and the most experienced person in this matter was his son, Kyle. However, their last conversation had ended in a heated argument. Kyle had wanted to launch an attack against the Xel'Thari, but the king had restrained him, hoping for peace. But that hope was now gone. Now, they needed Kyle's knowledge and expertise. The king turned to the two guards waiting by his throne. His gaze was firm, his voice was authoritative and sharp as he gave his command. "Find my son Kyle and bring him here immediately. Tell him, peace is over. War is beginning." The guards quickly saluted and exited the room, while the council members exchanged uncertain glances. Some thought Kyle was dangerous. His aggressive and impulsive nature could make things worse. Lord Rathmore took a deep breath and looked into the king's eyes. "Your Majesty, are you sure about this decision? Kyle wanted war. If you bring him in now, he will try to mobilize the entire army immediately." The king nodded slightly. Yes, he did. And perhaps he was right. The only way to stop the Xel'Thari is to fight them. But if we can control Kyle's actions, we can turn his aggression to our advantage. He is one of the few who have successfully killed these creatures. We must use his experience. The council members fell silent. The king had made his decision. War was coming, and they had no choice but to fight. After the guards left, the king summoned 3 council members whom he believed to be loyal to him. These 3 had been his most trusted advisors for years and possessed the ability to gather intelligence on the Xel'Thari. The king gazed at the 3 council members standing before his throne and lowered his voice as he spoke. "I have called you here for a special matter. As war approaches, we must learn more about our enemy. We need to expand our knowledge of the Xel'Thari's strengths, weaknesses, and intentions. I want you to gather all possible intelligence from our shadow spies, ancient records, and even those who have had direct contact with the Xel'Thari. This war will not be won by swords alone, but also by intelligence." The 3 council members bowed their heads, accepting the king's order. The king trusted their loyalty, but he knew that even the slightest betrayal in this war could destroy the entire kingdom. That is why he understood the importance of handling this mission with the utmost secrecy. Fixing his gaze on each of them one by one, he added, "This conversation stays here. Gather the information through discreet and reliable channels. No matter the cost, we must uncover the true intentions of the Xel'Thari." The 3 council members silently nodded and left the room. The king knew that understanding the enemy before the war began was the highest priority, and this knowledge could determine the fate of the battle.